Story 1: The security camera that saw someone before I did. I installed a small security camera outside my front door because packages kept disappearing from the porch. That was the entire reason. I never worried about break-ins or strange people wandering through our neighborhood. It felt like one of those minor annoyances everyone complains about before ordering something online. The camera was cheap, easy to mount, and honestly forgettable. Most days it recorded delivery drivers, squirrels, and the occasional neighbor walking a dog. Months later, 2 police officers knocked on my door and asked whether I still had the recordings. They weren't investigating the missing packages. That part surprised me immediately. They wanted footage from one specific night for reasons they wouldn't explain. I eventually learned why, but by then I had already seen something that still keeps me from watching security footage alone. Even now, whenever my phone buzzes with a motion alert, my stomach tightens before I open it. Looking back, everything about that quiet street seemed ordinary until it suddenly wasn't. If I had ignored those disappearing packages, none of this would have ever happened to me. When I first installed the little camera above my front door, it quietly slipped into my routine without changing much. Every weekday started the same way. I left for work a little before 8, coffee in one hand, and my laptop bag over my shoulder. By lunchtime, I usually checked the camera app out of habit, mostly expecting nothing. My neighborhood was the kind of place where people waved while mowing their lawns and complained more about recycling schedules than crime. Across the street lived Mr. Henderson, who walked his golden retriever every evening at exactly 6. Next door was a retired couple who spent weekends planting flowers that somehow survived every season. Everyone recognized everyone else, even if conversations rarely lasted longer than a few minutes. My parents stopped by every couple of weeks, usually bringing leftovers. My mother insisted I wasn't eating enough. My younger sister visited whenever she needed help with something on her car or wanted free laundry. Those ordinary visits made the house feel lived in, even when I spent most evenings alone. The camera never seemed important. Most notifications showed delivery drivers dropping off boxes, stray cats wandering across the porch, passing cars reflecting headlights across the driveway, or heavy rain blowing sideways during summer storms. Sometimes a neighborhood kid chased a basketball across the sidewalk, triggering another pointless alert. After a while, I stopped opening every notification immediately. If my phone buzzed during work, I usually glanced at the thumbnail, saw nothing unusual, and went back to whatever I was doing. The camera became another household gadget, quietly running in the background until I almost forgot it existed at all. Looking back, that ordinary boredom was probably the biggest reason I never questioned it when the late-night motion alerts finally started. I assumed they were just another harmless glitch or an animal passing through. Nothing about those first notifications suggested my life changing. The first late-night notification arrived on a Tuesday, a little after 2 in the morning. I only noticed it because I happened to wake up for a drink of water and saw the alert glowing on my phone. I opened the app expecting another cat or maybe a branch moving in the wind. The porch looked completely empty. Over the next couple of weeks, it happened again, always sometime between 2 and 4. Every recording looked ordinary at first glance. A few seconds of stillness, the driveway, the sidewalk, nothing else. I almost disabled the notifications because they kept interrupting my sleep. Then one night I paused a clip just before it ended. At the far left edge of the frame, barely visible, someone stepped into view for less than a second. I couldn't see a face or even tell whether it was a man or a woman. Before I could make out anything useful, the figure was already walking away. I convinced myself it was probably someone cutting through the neighborhood after a late shift or an early morning walk. People passed by occasionally, and the camera only covered part of the sidewalk anyway. It didn't seem worth worrying about. Looking back now, those tiny glimpses were the first real warning. The person never entered the center of the frame. They never approached the house. They always appeared at the edge, already leaving, as if they knew exactly where the camera could and couldn't see. I even zoomed into several recordings during lunch breaks, hoping clearer pixels would explain everything. Instead, every closer look raised another question, while the ordinary background somehow made the disappearing figure feel even stranger. The motion alert slowly became part of every night. Around 2 or 3 in the morning, my phone would vibrate, and by then I had stopped rushing to check it. Most mornings I watched the recordings over breakfast before leaving for work. Every clip seemed almost identical, but something kept changing. The figure was appearing more often. At first, it had been once every week or so. then every few nights. Eventually, there was a notification almost every single evening. The person still never crossed the middle of the screen, yet somehow felt closer every time. Sometimes the recording would begin with nothing visible. Then a shadow briefly stretched across the concrete, followed by the faintest glimpse of a shoulder or sleeve disappearing beyond the camera's view. I started wondering whether someone was deliberately standing inches outside the frame. About then, my next-door neighbor mentioned hearing footsteps outside late at night. He assumed teenagers were cutting through the yards. Another neighbor joked about raccoons learning to wear shoes. Nobody sounded worried, and I didn't mention the camera. I wasn't even sure what I had been seeing. Strangely, the package thefts stopped completely. Nothing disappeared anymore. Instead, small things around the porch seemed slightly different. The welcome mat wasn't straight. One flower pot had shifted a few inches. A chair I always kept against the wall faced the driveway instead. None of it looked dramatic enough to call the police, but none of it matched the way I left everything before bed. I became obsessive without realizing it. Every evening after work, I downloaded the newest clips and watched them frame by frame on my computer. I adjusted brightness, zoomed into dark corners, and replayed the same 10 seconds until my eyes hurt. Most of the time, I found absolutely nothing. Then another brief shape would appear, convincing me I wasn't imagining it after all. One Friday night, I fell asleep on the couch while watching television. My phone buzzed 3 times within 15 minutes. Half awake, I opened the app expecting another empty recording. The live view showed my porch exactly as it always looked. No movement, no sound. I locked the phone and went back to sleep. The next morning, I reviewed the saved clip. My stomach dropped before I reached the end. The figure didn't stay at the edge anymore. Whoever it was walked slowly across the porch, directly toward the camera. Their face remained hidden by darkness, but I could tell they were staring upward. They stopped only a foot from the lens and stood perfectly still for several long seconds. Then, without turning around, they slowly stepped backward into the darkness until they disappeared completely. I never heard footsteps. I never heard breathing. Never heard anyone outside my door that entire night. Somehow the camera recorded everything while the house remained completely silent, and that frightened me more than anything else ever could. I told myself there had to be a reasonable explanation, but none came. A few nights later, I woke to my phone vibrating over and over again. Half asleep, I grabbed it from the nightstand and saw 6 motion alerts waiting. My heart was already racing before I opened the app. The live feed showed my porch exactly as it always did. The welcome mat sat in place. The chair hadn't moved. Nothing crossed the driveway, and the street looked completely empty. I even watched for another minute, expecting someone to appear. Nobody ever did. The following morning, I downloaded the overnight recordings before leaving for work. The first few clips were empty. Then I reached one timestamp 3:12 a.m. Someone was standing directly outside my front door. They weren't pacing. They weren't looking around. They didn't knock or touch anything. They simply stood there, facing the door, completely motionless. Minute after minute passed. The recording kept going. They never shifted their weight. They never reached for the handle. They just remained there until the footage finally ended. The police later told me the person had likely remained outside for nearly 40 minutes before quietly walking away only a few minutes before sunrise. They searched the neighborhood, spoke with nearby residents, and checked other security cameras, but nobody could identify who it was. No arrests were made, and no missing person reports matched the figure. Investigators asked me to save every recording in case something changed, but nothing ever did. I still have those files stored on an old hard drive, unopened since. After that, I installed stronger locks on every exterior door and replaced the original camera with a newer system covering every angle around the house. None of it helped. Sleeping became difficult because every notification pulled me awake. Even when it turned out to be rain, a passing car, or a neighborhood cat. Before opening the app, I always felt the same, not in my stomach. Friends joked that I was becoming paranoid, but they had never watched those recordings. Even today, unexplained motion alerts make me hesitate before looking, because part of me expects someone to be waiting outside again. Years later, I still receive motion alerts during storms. Sometimes I hesitate before opening them because part of me still fears seeing that same face staring back into the camera. Even now, I always brace myself first before looking again. Story 2, my baby monitor recorded a voice that wasn't ours. I became a first-time parent, and suddenly, every little sound felt important. Before our daughter was born, I never thought much about baby monitors. Once she came home, I researched reviews, compared features, and probably spent far too much money finding one that promised crystal clear audio and automatic recording. It became part of our nightly routine, sitting quietly beside the bed while we tried to sleep between feedings. There's one recording from a completely ordinary Tuesday night that I have never deleted. It isn't because something happened to our baby. She was safe the entire time. In fact, if you only watched the video, you probably wouldn't notice anything unusual. The reason I still keep that file is because of another voice. Not mine, not my wife's, and not anyone who should have been inside our house that night. Even now, years later, I can't bring myself to play it after dark. Whenever people ask why we moved so suddenly, I think about that recording before answering. Some memories fade with time. That one never did. I can still hear it. When our daughter was born, everything revolved around tiny routines. My wife and I were still learning how to be parents, and every day felt like a mix of exhaustion and excitement. We celebrated things that would have sounded ridiculous before she arrived, like sleeping 3 straight hours or finishing dinner while it was still warm. The nights belonged to the baby. We took turns so neither of us completely fell apart. I handled the late evening feeding, then my wife covered the early morning hours. Sometimes we'd pass each other in the hallway without saying much, each carrying a bottle or a blanket before quietly returning to bed. The baby monitor sat on the nightstand every single night. It became as ordinary as brushing our teeth or locking the front door. Most alerts were completely normal. A burst of static, soft crying, our daughter rolling over in her crib. Occasionally the monitor activated because the room changed temperature or the microphone picked up harmless background noise. I usually glanced at the screen, confirmed she was asleep, and put the phone back down. Friends warned us that new parents worry about everything, and they were right. Every little cough sounded serious. Every quiet moment made us wonder whether we should check on her again. Still, our home felt peaceful. Family visited often, bringing meals and clean baby clothes, reminding us we weren't doing this alone. Looking back, those weeks were wonderfully ordinary. Recordings captured hundreds of tiny moments we would probably have forgotten otherwise. Nothing ever suggested danger. Nothing hinted that one ordinary Tuesday night would leave a single audio file sitting untouched on my computer for years. Because after everything that happened, deleting it somehow felt far more frightening than keeping it. I even joked that we'd someday laugh about our constant worrying, never imagining the monitor would become the one household device neither of us trusted again. The monitor started activating at strange times after a couple of weeks. Sometimes the notification appeared even though our daughter never made a sound. I'd check the live feed and find her sleeping peacefully, blanket tucked beneath her chin. At first I blamed the monitor. Cheap electronics, I figured. Sometimes picked up interference from nearby devices. Every once in a while I'd replay the recording and hear what sounded like a faint whisper. But it disappeared beneath static before I could understand anything. Then our daughter began waking at exactly the same time. Almost every night, sometime after 3, she'd suddenly cry until one of us picked her up. We laughed about her having an internal clock, but eventually my wife admitted she thought she heard someone softly speaking through the monitor before the crying started. I told her it was probably exhaustion playing tricks on us. A few nights later I noticed another saved clip. I turned the volume higher and listened carefully. Nothing obvious stood out. It's just static, quiet breathing, and ordinary silence stretching between harmless sounds. Looking back, those empty recordings were already telling us something was wrong. We simply didn't know how to hear it yet. I started checking older recordings during lunch breaks at work, hoping repeated patterns would explain everything. I compared dates, timestamps, and audio levels, convincing myself there had to be a technical explanation. Every clip looked ordinary until I expected something unusual. The more I searched, the less certain I became. My wife insisted we were both overtired, and I wanted to believe her. Deep down, though, I had started dreading every nighttime notification before it even arrived on my phone. After that, the strange recordings stopped feeling like isolated incidents. The monitor began saving clips almost every night, even when our daughter slept peacefully through them. Every morning I found another notification waiting, and every morning I told myself this would be the recording that finally explained everything. Instead, the questions only multiplied. The nursery door was usually left halfway open before we went to bed. More than once I woke up and found it opened wider than either of us remembered. Few mornings it was almost closed. Neither my wife nor I admitted getting up during the night, and we both assumed the other had simply forgotten. It seemed too small to argue about. Then we noticed the toys. Our daughter had a small stuffed rabbit that always sat beside the rocking chair. One morning it was lying near the crib. Another day a stack of soft blocks had somehow ended up against the opposite wall. We blamed ourselves at first. Sleep deprivation makes people forget simple things, and new parents misplace items constantly. Still, neither of us could remember touching them. The recordings became harder to dismiss. One clip captured what sounded exactly like slow footsteps crossing the nursery floor. They weren't loud, just soft measured creaks that seemed to stop beside the crib. The video itself showed nothing moving. Another recording contained quiet breathing close enough to the microphone that I instinctively looked over my shoulder while listening. That was the first time I felt genuinely afraid inside my own house. I stopped sleeping properly after that. Every small noise made me reach for the monitor. Instead of waiting for alerts, I found myself checking the live feed over and over throughout the night. Eventually, I dragged a blanket into the nursery and started sleeping beside the crib, telling my wife it would make nighttime feedings easier. The truth was, I didn't want our daughter alone in that room. For 3 nights, nothing unusual happened. I almost convinced myself my presence had solved whatever strange technical problem had been triggering the recordings. Then another alert arrived while I was lying less than 6 feet from the crib. The screen showed our daughter sleeping peacefully. The room around me was silent, yet the recording saved by the monitor captured the same slow breathing again, close enough to sound as if someone were standing directly beside the camera. The next morning I bought a second baby monitor from a different company. I placed it on the opposite side of the room, hoping one device would prove the other was malfunctioning. That night we turned both on before going to bed. At 3:07 in the morning, both monitors activated at exactly the same moment. Both recorded sound, neither showed anyone inside the nursery. That was the moment I stopped believing we were dealing with a faulty monitor, because 2 completely different devices had captured the same unexplained activity at the exact same second. And I couldn't explain that away anymore. One night, my wife and I were both downstairs cleaning bottles after finally getting our daughter back to sleep. The monitor stayed upstairs beside her crib, exactly where it always sat. A notification appeared on my phone, even though neither of us heard crying. I opened the saved recording without thinking. The video showed our daughter sleeping peacefully. Nothing moved. The curtains hung still. The bedroom door remained half open. Then a voice spoke. It wasn't loud, wasn't distorted or buried beneath static. It sounded clear, calm, and incredibly close to the crib. I couldn't make out every word, but it was unmistakably human. My wife looked at me before asking whether I had said something. I hadn't. We replayed the clip again and again. The same voice appeared every time. We called the police that morning. Officers searched every room, checked windows, doors, the attic, crawl space, and even outside around the property. They found no signs of forced entry, no hidden speakers, and nobody else inside the house. Before leaving, one officer asked for a copy of the recording. He admitted it was strange but couldn't explain it. We never received another update. Recording still exists exactly as it was captured. I haven't deleted it because part of me believes hearing it once was enough, and another part worries someone else might someday explain what we never could. No investigation produced answers, and no neighbor reported hearing anything unusual that night, leaving only silence afterward forever. We moved within 2 months. Officially, it was because my commute had changed, but both of us knew the recording was the real reason. Our daughter grew into a happy, healthy child, and thankfully she remembers nothing about that house. My wife and I almost never talk about the recording. The baby monitor went into a box and stayed there until we eventually threw it away. We never bought another. Even now, certain quiet sounds around the house make us stop, listen, and remember that one impossible recording neither of us has ever truly forgotten, despite all these years together. I still have the original audio saved. I haven't played it in years because I already remember exactly what it said. Every word remains clear enough that I never need hear it again at all. Story 3. The Dashcam captured someone who was never there. I bought a Dashcam after watching a minor accident turn into a shouting match at an intersection. Nobody was badly hurt, but both drivers told completely different stories. And I remember thinking how easily one ordinary drive could become someone else's problem. A week later, I ordered a small camera and mounted it behind my rearview mirror. For months, it recorded nothing interesting, or commutes, red lights, bad weather, the same empty highway I drove every evening. I only reviewed footage when I needed to clear memory from the card. That was how I noticed the person. They were standing beside the road on a stretch of highway where there were no houses, no sidewalks, and nowhere reasonable to walk from. At first, that was strange enough. But what disturbed me wasn't just seeing someone there. It was realizing that, during the drive itself, I had looked straight at that exact spot through my windshield, and nobody had been there. When I first started using the Dashcam, it quickly became another piece of background technology. I barely thought about it. Every weekday followed the same predictable rhythm. I left work around 5:30 each evening and pointed my car toward home. Most of the drive followed a long rural highway that cut through open fields and scattered patches of trees. There weren't many businesses once I reached that stretch, only the occasional farmhouse sitting far back from the road. Traffic was usually light, especially after sunset. I almost always stopped at the same small gas station about halfway home. Sometimes I grabbed a coffee, sometimes just stretched my legs for a minute before finishing the drive. The cashier recognized me after a while and usually nodded before I even reached the counter. Back in the car, I'd play the latest episode of my favorite history podcast. It kept me awake without demanding much attention. I knew every curve in the road and could probably drive it from memory, though obviously I never would. The Dashcam quietly recorded everything before automatically overwriting the oldest files. That was exactly why I bought it. It stayed out of my mind unless something unusual happened, which was almost never. Weeks of identical drives disappeared without me ever watching them again. Looking back, those ordinary evenings were the calmest part of my day. The highway gave me time to unwind before getting home. Some nights I watched the sunset fade across the fields, while other evenings heavy clouds settled low enough to make everything feel gray. If rain started, the camera simply captured windshield wipers moving back and forth. If deer wandered near the shoulder, I slowed down and kept driving. Nothing ever happened that seemed worth saving. The memory card was just another loop of ordinary miles that erased themselves every few days. I never imagined one forgotten recording would completely change the way I. After a few months, people at the gas station started mentioning odd stories about the highway. Nothing dramatic, just rumors about drivers spotting someone walking near the trees late at night. Nobody claimed anything dangerous, and everyone seemed to laugh them off. Still, the conversations stayed with me. One evening, I decided to review a few older dashcam recordings before they were overwritten. Most clips looked exactly as I remembered: empty pavement, fading daylight, passing trucks, and endless fields. Then I paused one recording. Near a cluster of trees, far beyond the shoulder, someone appeared to be standing perfectly still. The figure was tiny, almost blending into the background. If I hadn't stopped the video, I would have missed it. I assumed it was a hiker, a farmer, or someone fixing a vehicle hidden behind the trees. There was nothing obviously threatening about the image. The person never moved toward the road, and the camera caught only a single distant frame before the car continued forward. Weeks passed before I noticed another recording with what looked like the same distant figure. Again, it appeared only briefly. Again, it stood beside the trees without moving. Looking back, those moments felt like quiet warnings. At the time, they seemed too ordinary to deserve real concern. And I convinced myself coincidence was the simplest explanation. I even checked the recording dates twice, wondering whether I had accidentally reopened the same file. The timestamps were different, the weather had changed, and different cars passed by. Yet that distant figure appeared in almost exactly the same place every single time. Each new recording made me open the previous one for comparison. The figure kept appearing, and every time it seemed a little closer to the road. It never changed posture, never waved, never walked. It simply stood there, facing the highway as my car passed. I started slowing down whenever I reached that stretch of road. Instead of driving the usual 55, I dropped to 40 and carefully scanned both sides of the highway. Every evening, I looked toward the trees expecting to spot the person. Every evening, the roadside was completely empty. That contradiction bothered me more than anything. The camera insisted someone had been there, but my own eyes never saw anyone. I even rolled the windows down once, thinking I might hear footsteps or voices. There was nothing except wind moving through the grass and the distant sound of trucks. I mentioned the recordings to a couple of friends. They laughed at first, then watched the clips. Both agreed the images looked strange, but neither believed they showed a real person. One blamed digital compression. Others suggested insects crossing the lens or light reflections creating odd shapes. I wanted to believe them because their explanations sounded reasonable. Still, I couldn't ignore what happened next. The following week, I reviewed another drive before deleting the memory card. This time, the figure was standing much nearer the shoulder. It remained perfectly still while my car approached. I stared through the windshield during that entire section of road, yet I remembered seeing nothing. When the video reached that moment, the person appeared clearly beside the pavement. My headlights illuminated the grass around them, but somehow I had driven past without noticing anyone. I replayed the clip 5 times. The result never changed. After that, I began speaking the time aloud as I drove through the area. I wanted my memory anchored to something specific. I described the weather, passing vehicles, road signs, and every movement I could see. Later, the recordings still revealed the silent figure while my spoken observations never mentioned another person. Eventually, the figure reached the edge of the road. According to the footage, they stood only a few feet from my lane. I remembered gripping the steering wheel and looking directly ahead, but there had been nobody there. The strangest part was the posture. The figure never turned its head toward the passing traffic. It never reacted to headlights or engine noise. It looked frozen, like someone waiting for something only the camera could see. By then I dreaded reviewing the footage, yet I couldn't stop. Every drive ended with me sitting in my driveway with the engine off, watching the newest recording before going inside. Each review left me more confused than the last. Whatever the dashcam captured existed only after the drive was over, and that impossible detail frightened me far more than if I had actually seen someone standing there myself. I stopped taking that route soon afterward, but the recordings remained unchanged. One night, I was driving home later than usual when something slammed against the driver's side of my car. The sound was so sudden and violent that I instinctively hit the brakes and pulled onto the shoulder. My heart was pounding as I grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside. I checked every door, every window, the tires, and the side panels. There wasn't a scratch. Nothing lay on the road. No animal, no broken branch, no loose debris. The highway remained completely silent, except for distant traffic. I drove home shaken but convinced I'd probably hit something small that bounced away. The next evening I removed the memory card and watched the recording. Everything looked normal until a split second before the impact. Someone was standing inches from my driver's window. The figure wasn't walking toward the car or crossing the road. It simply stood there, facing the glass as I passed. Then the loud impact echoed, the camera jolted, and the figure disappeared from the frame. I replayed that moment dozens of times. Nothing explained why I never saw anyone through the windshield or why there wasn't any damage afterward. Police inspected the vehicle when I reported the incident, but they found no paint, fingerprints, dents, hair, or fabric. They searched the roadside the following morning and discovered nothing unusual. No tire marks left the pavement, no footprints crossed the grass, and no missing person report ever matched the figure. I never found another explanation after that night either. After that night, I permanently changed my route home. The drive took nearly 20 extra minutes, but I never returned to that stretch of highway again. I also stopped driving after dark unless I had absolutely no choice. The dash cam is still mounted behind my mirror, but only because it might help after an accident. I never review the recordings anymore. Once the memory card fills, I erase everything without watching. Some questions are easier to live with than answers. I have no desire to see that roadside figure waiting for me again in another forgotten recording ever again. Sometimes my dash cam reports motion while the parked car sits completely empty. I delete those clips without watching them because I'm afraid one day the recording will finally show exactly what I never saw with my own eyes.